We're live.
Welcome to the
Hello.
eclipse.
Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers.
I'm Caitlin Miller.
We are both licensed therapists, but this is not therapy for so very, very many reasons.
So many reasons.
This is just an open conversation. We're here for an hour every week, although, as Caitlin just mentioned, today there is a solar eclipse happening, and so we will likely end the stream somewhat early. We'll see how things are going in terms of when exactly we wrap up.
Mhm.
But Caitlin will be leaving at 1:30.
Mhm.
Yes, we work at a small private therapy practice called Effective Artistry in Northbrook, Illinois. We do individual, family, and couples therapy for people in the state of Illinois. We also work with a few executive functioning coaches that can work with people anywhere in the world. This is just an open conversation. Caitlin and I will be talking about whatever we're talking about, and we appreciate you being here. And we're, of course, doing our best to make sure that what we're talking about is potentially of interest to those of you watching. But we appreciate people making comments, typing in your thoughts, questions, responses, whatever, because that makes it a lot easier for us to have an idea of what would be of interest to people. I think that's mostly
Public rebroadcast.
This
comments,
is-
YouTube.
This is public. Yes, it's a live stream. It's public, so keep that in mind with your comments, including that this stream is saved as a video on demand with the comments saved along with it. Whatever account we stream simultaneously on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. So wherever you're watching us from, if you comment through that site, it will appear under the account that you are logged into for that site. It's one of the many reasons it's not therapy. I think that's pretty much it.
Oh, and I honestly wasn't listening very much, but I think part of it too is if you and I are talking about something, people are welcome to say something completely different. It doesn't have to be on topic.
Yeah.
They can
Like any
change
other
the
conversation, this isn't hierarchical or one directional. It's a conversation. It's a group conversation where two of us happen to be on camera, and whoever else is participating in the conversation is participating through the chat. So yeah, don't feel as though you need to, if we're talking about something different and you want to talk about something else or have a question about something, put it out there. We're happy to go wherever.
Correct.
Yeah. How are you?
Mostly good. Yeah. How are you, Brandon?
Doing all right. I'm a little bit stressed out, which might be in part just from being hungry, but also businessy things that are not my favorite stuff to spend time and energy on that are taking my time and attention right now. But other than that, good. Things are good.
How was your weekend?
It was good. It was enjoyable. Busy. Spent a lot of time with the family, which is, that's pretty much the same every weekend for me, which is great. My wife and I went out to a birthday party at a bar this weekend, which isn't usual for us.
Like an adult birthday party?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, an adult.
It would be strange to have a child's birthday party at a bar.
I know.
And that was fun. Although also...
Who is the adult?
I don't want to say people's names on stream. Somebody we know locally. Somebody who lives in Northbrook. Not that there's like a problem, I just...
And their initials are JR. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no. Just somebody that we know.
Yeah. That's a new thing for you, right?
Well, it's
No,
unusual.
ever.
It's unusual for Susan and I to be going out. Yeah, we don't go out very often these days. And certainly when we do, it's not often that we're going out and like socializing with other people. Usually, most of the time, if the two of us are going out without the kids, it's just the two of us go and do something.
Yeah.
Mostly just like a dinner for an hour or two and then come home. We don't get out a whole lot these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a good weekend. How about you?
I had a nice dinner with a friend Saturday, and did, I don't even know, maybe 12 hours of ceramics over the weekend. It was a lot of ceramics,
Cool.
a lot of pottery.
I don't know how well the mic picks up whispering.
Oh, okay. I did a lot of ceramics over the weekend, maybe about 12 hours, and then I glazed a lot of pieces on Saturday, and glazing is just so interesting and so complicated and also so just like not up to you. Something happens.
Oh, like
Um,
you can't prevent things from going wrong, you mean?
yeah, and sometimes it's happy surprises, but like there was someone in my class who is incredible at glazing, and usually like whatever their intention is, it comes to fruition, but they had a few pieces that came out completely differently, and it's interesting how glazing sometimes it's not just like, oh, I was thinking it would be a vibrant green color and it's more of like a brownish green. It can just be completely messed up. So like there's
Messed up meaning differently than what you were aiming for,
Yeah,
or is
different
it
than what
like
you're aiming
damages
for.
what the piece? Or...
Sometimes damages the piece, but mostly different from what you're aiming for. So and I have a lot of textural pieces right now, and so I'm trying to figure out different techniques to make it so after it's glazed, you can still see the texture, because if texture isn't that deep on pottery, it can just get covered over by the glaze, because the glaze is like essentially glass on top of the ceramic. It has that kind of effect. So I was trying to do all these different things to ensure that when it gets through, it shows the texture, and it's just fascinating. And
Cool.
yeah.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, I think sometimes I make it less fun than it could be. Because on Saturday I pressured myself to like, I think I glazed like 16 pieces and I used like 8 different color combinations. So I was just like jumping around, dipping things in and dipping another thing. And
Wow.
yeah,
And that made it less fun?
I think it made it less fun because of the time crunch. Because I think sometimes doing things that are more complicated, it takes more of my attentional energy, and then it's more enjoyable because it's more distracting. But I think when I do it when there's not quite enough time, I think that's when I get more stressed out.
Okay. Well, what's on
You
your
seem
mind?
like you don't want to talk about this.
Oh no, I'm happy to. I just didn't do. I was interpreting that as the way I always run sessions is starting with like an update, right? Like every time I meet with a client, every session starts with a what's been happening, of all the things that have been happening in your life, what do you want me to know about? Update me, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll ask at a certain point, okay, and what's on your mind that you want to work on today? What do we want to actually discuss?
Oh, that's helpful.
And I have a tendency to just kind of the stream or like structured conversations, supervisions, things like that tend to go a similar way. I do both of those things for a reason. I think it's important for people to have an opportunity to say, like, here's how I am and what's going on with me, without it having to be that that's not what we're going to spend all our time talking about. That there's then a second step of
Yeah, and I was
discuss.
assuming you picked up on some sort of social cue that you were interpreting as me not wanting to continue to talk about it. But it sounds like that's not what happened.
Yeah, no, I just was interpreting it as something that you were kind of like coming on board, like me talking about the weekend kind of thing.
Interesting.
And
can you tell me the function of or the utility of doing a general check-in and then getting into something specific? What about that is helpful in structured conversations?
Yeah, well, and I'll say specifically therapy, and that's what this design is for. I mean, coaching too, where it's intended that one person is there to help, like both people are there to work on one person making changes that they want to be making. And it does bleed over into other kinds of conversations for me, just as a matter of habit and how I talk to people. But I have, in my mind, there are 7 phases to a therapy session, 2 of which happen like before or as the client is entering into the space. So then the update portion of it is the first one that's like explicitly discussed.
Is that number 3?
Yes. I'm trying to think about it in my head. It's 3 and 4. So the first is to create the therapeutic space. The second is to enter that space yourself. The third is to welcome the client into that space. And then the fourth is the update. But that third thing is happening as you're welcoming them into the Zoom room or into the whatever. And I always start with the same phrase of, it's great to see you. How have you been? What's been going on? So that kind of accomplishes both of those things for me. People have their different ways of going about it. Carl Rogers, who is awesome, his particular starting off a session phrase was, I'm blanking on it in the moment, but this won't be verbatim, but it was something like, what would you like me to know, or something like that. What do you want to tell me about? What do you want to talk to me? Something to that effect. And I wish I could.
I could probably Google it.
Usually I don't say usually. It's been a long time since I've discussed this specific thing. I used to remember it verbatim. What would you like? Oh, I'd be happy to know anything you'd like to tell me. Something. I think it's that. I'd be happy to know whatever you'd like to tell me.
Wow.
I'd be happy to know. I'll have to look it up. But I think it was that. I'd be happy to know whatever you'd like to tell me.
And then is there a question after they answer that? That's something like, what do you want to focus on today?
Are you talking about for me?
Yeah.
So back to me. Yeah, well, there's different versions of the question that transitions from the phase that I call the update to the work. And I can choose specific, like the most high pressure version of the question is, what do we need to work on today? And the lowest pressure version of the question is, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? But there's a million different variations in between. Need and want can be swapped out.
And are you saying that's 4 or that's 5? What step is that?
Oh, getting into the work is the 5th.
Okay. What are the other stages?
Ushering the client out of the space and then closing the space.
6, 7. Okay. What is the utility of the welcoming and then also the focusing? Is there something about consciousness or human beings or linguistics or?
Well, the point of I want to clearly identify what we are intending to do. What is the function or purpose or focus of a particular part of the conversation, so that it's clear and explicit to people. People have varying extent to which they care about knowing that, but it helps set the frame either way.
I've noticed neurodivergent clients who identify as neurodivergent, that can be really helpful.
Sure. It's helpful for anyone and everyone. In the same way that I think we were talking, was it last week, we were talking about looking at a picture and what you're set up to be. So explaining to people that this is how these sessions go and then doing it that way is helpful in and of itself. I also think it is very important and often, if not always at first, very difficult for people to be the ones to guide the conversation in a particular direction. People tend to focus on, or people tend to have an expectation that the therapist or the coach or whatever is going to say, okay, here's what we need to talk about today. Here's what we're going to work on today. There's reasons that we're obviously we're trained to expect that this person's an expert and they will be teaching me and they will tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Where a person being able to observe and identify their own, the things that are happening in their own internal experience is important. A person being in a position in which they have to give voice to those things, so they're getting better at noticing it, they're getting better at giving voice to it, and to make sure that what we're doing is focused on the most effective approach, efficient approach, I should say. Because a lot of times people will think well, this is what I should be working on, or this is the kind of thing I'm supposed to bring to therapy, or this is something that's caused me the most problems. But what happens is working memory is a finite space, and whatever is on the front of your mind is what's on the front of your mind. And it is possible, obviously, to like kind of push past that and talk about something else. But that's still taking up some of that space. And depending on the conversation and how things go, like that can change and it can become less and less until all that space is available for whatever is being discussed. Sometimes it stays there. Sometimes it even takes up more and more and more space as the conversation moves forward without addressing it. So training people to have to say what is there right off the top. Plus it sets up a different particular dynamic between therapists. It's an active effort to work against this idea that people will frequently have of I'm the expert, listen to me. We're here together because of what I have to say, more so than we're here together because of what you have to say.
What would you do in this circumstance when a client would often recap, like giving you an update that feels good to them, but then when you get to the question of what's on your mind or what do you want to work on today, I feel like I just got a bunch of stuff wrong in what I was just saying, so now I'm getting distracted by that. But when you ask that question, if they say like, I don't know often, how do you approach that?
Well, that usually happens, especially early on. And one of the things I tell people when I'm telling them how these sessions will go is to let them know that nobody really is comfortable doing that in the first session and that it takes time, but that we're aiming to get to the point where they're doing that comfortably as quickly as possible. And then I have kind of sneaky ways of making it happen anyway, even in the first session, but just not quite so overtly. Well, like in a consult, for example, something that I'll do is say, when I join in, we do free 20-minute consults before we decide, for clients and for us to make sure that this seems like it's a good fit before we start work together. And when I start off a consult, I'll say, thank you for being here, blah, 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 stuff to like welcome them in. And then I'll say, the way I like to run these things is we have 20 minutes to talk about whatever you need to talk about, whatever you want to talk about. This is an opportunity for you to get the information you need to be able to determine whether or not you're interested in moving on to the next step. And so if you have ideas about that, like questions and things you want to discuss right off the top, great, let's start there. I also know that a lot of times people are more comfortable with having me ask questions first. That's more what they've been prepared for. So how should we start this off? So I am giving them the option for me to be the one that asks questions first so that they can still be in that role that they're more prepared for and more comfortable with. But it is still them that has to say what we're doing. They have to say if they want me to ask them questions first or if they want to start things off. So stuff like that. Things like, would you like it if I were to blank blank, right? Like if I am going to do something. Okay. Hey, I have a couple questions. If you end up having time, my son has speech delay and I feel like we talk to him all the time and I do think he's been improving, but I can't help but notice some of the kids are a bit further along with their speech development by his age. He'll be 3 next month. Just wondering if there's anything you feel like would be good to try. Right now I try to say things over and over when we do something or he asks for something like, you want to play with the truck? I'm just worried I'm not doing everything I can to support him. Also, my other question is, how do you get yourself to get stuff done that you need to? I work from home and sometimes I get distracted or procrastinate projects for work and I'd like to be better about that. These are both great questions. And like we said, I'd be happy to pivot to them if you're...
Oh, yeah. I want to hear your answers. I have no idea about the first one. So.
Well, the first one
I'm
is...
curious what you're going to say.
The first one is... it's one of those cases where there's so many specifics that I would want to ask a lot of questions and maybe we can even do some of that. Obviously you're here and you can answer some things in chat. But I can certainly start off with something. I'll say my middle son is currently in speech language therapy, does work with the SLP at his school. When we're talking about delays, any kind of developmental delay with kids, what we're talking about is, yes, how they compare to a statistical observation of kids that share their chronological age. And there are so many things that play into all of that.
Yeah.
That it's really complicated. So I can potentially, and maybe we'll have time for this, and if not, we can come back to it another week too. I can give some specific thoughts Also, a speech language pathologist would obviously be able to give a lot of specific thoughts, and perhaps your son, they said son, right? Yeah, him. Uh, your son might already be working with one and doing those things.
Mhm.
So first of all, I don't know what you mean specifically by speech delay. Speech delay breaks down into different categories. Sometimes it's language acquisition, like the amount of words that they know and attempt to use. Sometimes it's articulation, that their vocabulary is on par or even beyond what we would expect to see at that age for most people. But for some reason, they have a difficulty like the physical articulation of those sounds makes it difficult to understand. It makes it difficult for people to understand and interpret what they're saying. Sometimes that can be compensated for. That in particular is my middle son's struggle, who's about to turn 5, is an articulation issue. Expressive language mostly, I think he's generally pretty good at understanding. So that's good. Expressive versus receptive language is a way to break it down for sure. Which I did kind of assume, because you're talking about a speech delay versus a comprehension or an intellectual disability, which is more how that other stuff would generally be observed. But even more than that, is it about word selection? Like he struggles to come up with what words he's wanting to say? Or is it that he knows what words he's trying to say, but has difficulties uttering the words, or that he's uttering them, he's saying them, but they're articulated in a way that are difficult for people to understand and interpret?
That's fascinating.
What?
Just this is like a whole corner of child development that I know nothing about, and it's interesting to hear you talk about.
Well, minus the articulation piece, this is adult stuff all the time too.
Yeah.
99 times out of 100, when someone tells you that they're an introvert or that they have social anxiety, they're having expressive language difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
That what they're talking about is either they have some concept that they want to communicate, but they can't come up with a way that they think, if I say this, then people will understand what I'm trying to get across.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is a matter of, no, I know even exactly the words that I want to say. I'm just having difficulty getting like the mechanism of my, my voice to say those things.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful for you to bring it back to adults.
Right.
Which makes sense, obviously.
And articulation obviously does affect adults as well, but not as commonly.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there's like in the English language, there's something called the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is it's an alphabet, a way of connecting symbols to sounds that encompasses all sounds that the human vocal instrument is capable of producing. Something really fascinating. I think it's multiple things. He has difficulty pronouncing words. For example, giraffe was pronounced jaff or things like that. But more than that, he has difficulty putting together sentences. He can usually only put together 1, 2, or 3 words at the very most. That's good to know too, and still could be different things. So actually what I was going to say is the R sound is a particularly difficult sound for humans to make.
Yeah.
It's part of why even in English, there are so many dialects. That I was an acting major in undergraduate, and I did like a lot of voice, like learned a lot about voice and stuff. So I don't want this to sound like this is like therapist knowledge that therapists have or should have or whatever. But there are dialects, we call them rhotic dialects, are ones that use the R sound, and non-rhotic, RHOTIC dialects are ones that don't use the R sound.
Interesting.
So if you think of, for example, British and Australian accents, are English speakers who don't use the R. They do use the R somewhat, but very rarely, intermittently. Typically what we call the intrusive R, which is when it's inserted in between 2 vowels as a way of distinguishing the end of one and the beginning of another. Blah, blah, blah. So jaff is not an uncommon mispronunciation of giraffe, because if you think taking the R out, jaff, without an R at all, it just sounds like jaff. I guess a larger point I'm trying to make is that when it comes to really anything observable that humans do, any any behavior, what we would call behavior, things that the human's body does that can be observed by other humans, there are always, well, I shouldn't say always, there are two elements to that, three potentially, depending on, there's the system, the mechanism which executes the thing. So in this case, we're talking about the vocal instrument, the vocal cords and the.
I just realized it's 1:30.
All right, it's 1:30, so
Yeah.
Caitlin's gonna go
Wishing you
and
the best.
enjoy
See you
yourself.
soon.
I will probably step aside at a certain point. Right. So, for example, like if someone has spinal cord injury and their nerves have been severed past a certain point. Right, let me back up. There's the mechanism that executes it. Typically, we're talking about like the skeletal muscular system, but there are other things that we can talk about that happen with people that are in the digestive system or cardiovascular or whatever. But as far as what people generally observe without utilizing specialized tools or going to a doctor, we're generally talking about something skeletal muscular. Then there's also the nervous system, where it's about what instructions are being relayed to that system in order for them to be executed. And then there's that when intention is involved, which it isn't always, but generally with speech it is. When there is conscious intention, then there's that element of it too. What is somebody trying to do? So there's what is the intention? How is that intention translated and communicated to the body? And then how does the body execute those instructions? Something like this could be, for example, that he has low muscle tone, that the muscles in his mouth, cheeks, tongue, jaw, right, either are have some difficulty in activating, or more likely if it's a muscle issue, is that it's very costly, right? That when people are learning to sing, or if you're learning a different dialect, something that you'll notice is that your mouth, your cheek, your jaw will get tired because you're using those muscles in different ways than you usually do. Kind of think about like having an experience where you're laughing so much or smiling so much that your cheeks hurt or your jaw hurts, right? There are different things that can dictate how quickly we're drained by utilizing a certain thing, right? Like some people, when they jog for a mile, it doesn't cost them that much energy. Other people trying to jog for a mile, no, it's just not going to happen because of how quickly we tire. Some of that is about conditioning and training, and you can change that. Some of that can be due to things that either don't change or don't change in response to particular like efforts. Learning to roll R's is tiring. Yeah. So that's one possibility. And when things like that are involved, when it's like an energy expenditure issue that is just very taxing, that can be very difficult to identify for people, partly because it can vary a lot from context to context, because sometimes, you know, in the same way that like if you were evaluating my ability to, I don't know, do a push-up, that there are times where because of other things that are going on or have recently happened, I can't even, like the idea of trying to do a push-up, I'm not even going to try. And other times where doing a push-up, like, oh yeah, okay, easy, no problem, right? And that can make it difficult to identify what to target, because we see we observe different things in ways that can be difficult to isolate variables because they're impacted by other things that we can't control for in the moment that we're observing it. Stuff like that won't show up well on a test because it's impacted by what's happening in the moment, hour, day, whatever, before the test happens that we can't control for and observe. As a general rule, that's a lot of why I focus so much on cost with people, especially early on in our work together, is that stuff tends to go unnoticed. That's where you'll see a lot of like, I know I can do it, or I know he can do it, right? Whether we're judging ourselves or somebody else, because I've done it. I used to do it. So I don't know what's wrong with me that I can't do it now. Or I know he can do it because I've seen him do it. So I don't know if he's just not motivated enough to do it in this case or whatever. It's important to remember that capability is not binary or static. It's not that you can or can't do a thing. It's how much does it cost you to do that thing, and how much something costs you changes moment to moment. And when it's something like that, it can be very difficult and tricky to assess, because in the same way that, like, okay, let's say that I want to work on developing my stamina as a jogger, like, yes, barring certain medical things, we can fairly confidently say that if I jog to a certain extent and then stop and rest for a certain amount and then do it again to a certain extent, that my capacity to do it will increase, my efficiency will increase, and it will cost me less and less. And if I don't titrate that, if I don't balance that correctly, right? If I push myself too hard, then I can injure myself, which slows the whole process down more than not doing it at all. If I don't rest enough or replenish enough in between attempts, then that can slow down progress or make it so that I don't make progress. Including the usually, he can usually only put together 1, 2, or 3 words at the very most, indicates to me that there might be some of that going on. In addition to the cost of the physical, there can also be the cost of in relaying directions from the intention to the execution, right? Like that if my nervous system is doing a lot of other stuff at the same time as I am trying, and again, this is something we'll see with anyone and everyone, right? Where you put me in a particular context and my ability to communicate gets worse, right? That I'm distracted by things, or my system is overwhelmed by sensory input coming in, or whatever. If receptive language, if it seems like he knows and can interpret these words in ways that like make sense, with some significant disparity with how much he uses the words, then it's probably not a matter of like knowing the words, language acquisition and comprehension. If it's much more in expressive language than in receptive, it probably is more about either not the words that I know and therefore want to use, but either in like how I am translating that intention in specific instructions to the vocal instrument, or how the vocal instrument is doing it. And I was trying to make the point that over time, if I know that that's very difficult for me, then even my intention of what words I'm going to say, I might start looking for easier words to say or fewer words to say, because even though I have other words and could do more, be more specific or use more words or whatever, I only have so much, it costs me so much, so I'm aiming to be efficient. So there's that. As far as what you do, I mean, I would say if he's not been evaluated to be working with an SLP, a speech language pathologist, I would do that. If he's under the age of 3 in the United States, under the age of 3, your state government has a responsibility to provide support services. Once they hit, that could be state by state. I know this is the case in Illinois. It might be different in other states, but in Illinois, under the age of 3, it's the state government that has the responsibility to assess for support needs and provide them. After the ages of 3, it switches over to the local school district. So if you haven't engaged in that process, I think it's worth looking into that. Now, I was trying to give some like specifics, but here's what I would say overarchingly is this is generally not a thing to worry much about. Good. And so we do have someone who comes by and gives little worksheets to work on him with every few weeks. That's helped, I think. Good. So you can ask questions with that person, give specific feedback, and ask specific questions from that person. And there's a bunch of specific things that speech language pathologists will do, things like using your hands to help provide like shape and whatever to what they're trying to do, right? That like squeezing the cheeks together can make it easier for them to say a certain sound. Or having their hands on your face so that they can feel, having them watch you very closely as you enunciate things, stuff like that. Anyway, I'm going to back up a bit and say my first general thought for this kind of thing would be, and I'm going to try and wrap up here to get outside, and people are starting to go look at the eclipse as it's getting going, is that you don't generally really need to worry about this, right? That like what you want to focus most on is his ability to communicate needs in this moment. You don't need to do too much worrying about projecting this into the future and what it might mean for him as he grows and develops. Speech is notoriously one of those things that, like, yes, we can do like a statistical, we would expect most kids to have these words at this age and these words at this age and so on. But there's a large standard deviation there. Very wide range in speech development as opposed to some other things that have a narrower range. I want to say more about this because I'm not trying to dismiss your concerns, but it is useful for us to do work to collect information and do statistical analysis to determine what is the most common or typical or whatever experiences that we observe in people. It is not meant to be a thing that we use as a benchmark to judge is somebody like, are they doing good or doing bad, right? Obviously, we use it as a way to try and do early identification of, if we provide support at an earlier step in the process, that'll make other things easier later on. But it's not, how do I want to phrase this? It is not something that a parent needs to be worried that they should be doing something that they're not doing or aren't doing something that they should be doing or whatever. It's fine. It's not a bad thing to keep an eye on it and to address it and pursue things, but it is not very predictive. Things change. Every child, it would be unusual for a child of that age to be able to utilize the R sound or the L sound. This is common, like, not that there aren't things about it that are uncommon. I'm not trying to dismiss or say that what you're seeing is totally normal and you're just perceiving it as normal, by the way, meaning most common, what normal technically means, right? That the most common. Unlikely he'll have any long-term disadvantage based on slower speech development. Yeah, and that's the thing with parents especially. I have this thought that momentum matters. Like if he's able to excel young, he'll be able to build confidence and continue to excel later. That's such an understandable thought. And most people have it. And what I'm about to say is that I'm offering you something that's a little different, but I don't want it to be taken as criticism because it isn't criticism. It's not intended to be criticism. Is that working through that lens of excelling or, whatever the struggling, like being better at or worse than, even being on level versus a delay, whatever, that's all deficit model stuff, which is useful for what it is useful for. I'm not trying to take that away, but that's most likely, it is unlikely that your concerns about your son are the only area where you feel like needing or, excelling, going above and beyond expectations is important. This is probably true of the way you evaluate other things, including yourself and in your own life, where even being on par is, okay, it's all right, but I'm a little concerned, right? Confidence is not something that comes from people excelling. This is a lot of what people will talk about with former gifted kid syndrome kind of stuff, right? Confidence doesn't come from feeling that it is likely that you will excel. Confidence is about feeling like it's not going to be that big of a deal whether you excel or not, if that makes sense. As a general rule of thumb, when someone is insecure or anxious or afraid of what might happen in the future, that things could go well or could go poorly, it's a natural and understandable instinct for us to want to say, no, things are going to go well, things won't go poorly. And that doesn't I mean, mostly we call that toxic positivity, right? If you're saying like, oh, I know I'm so worried that if I get up on stage, I'm gonna like whatever. And people are saying, no, 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 you'll do great, you'll do great. Does that really make you feel more confident? Usually not. Explore with people is like, so let's say you get up on stage and you do bomb, then what? Instead of thinking of it as the way that you've been trained to think of it, that failure, quote unquote, in this case, is indicative of more failure being more likely in other and unrelated cases. It's about the specifics, not just do I fail or do I succeed? And therefore, any failure says, well, I'm a person who fails a lot and everything's going to go worse. Instead, it's what happens. In this case, it's fine. If he uses 1, 2, 3 word phrases, cool. If he uses more words, cool. If he doesn't talk at all, cool. The more stress there is around performance, the more stress there is around performance. What we find is that even rewarding and praising people for doing well by whatever benchmark, even in a thing that they do originally for no promise of reward or praise, right? Like if someone is doing something just because they enjoy it, and those observing them say, wow, they did a good job, and then go to that person and say, here's a reward for this thing that you did really well. It makes the person enjoy doing that thing less. The more we make something about rewards and punishments, the more people will just be looking through the lens of rewards and punishments. So he'll be fine, and you'll be fine. He has parents who are attentive and loving and considerate and supportive. You'll all be fine. What do you do instead? Well, this gets into a trickier question. I am going to, but if we come back to some of this stuff in the future, and I would like to talk about your other question too about procrastination and getting things done. You don't want to ignore their accomplishments, but you also don't want to frame them as accomplishments, if that makes sense. In the same way that people explore what's called natural consequences in lieu of punishment, rather than punishing someone, the thing that happens because of the thing that you did. If there's something we don't want you to do and you do it, there's a reason we don't want you to do it. It theoretically causes some problem. So when they do the thing and that problem occurs, that's not a punishment that's been imposed. Same with accomplishments. When there's something that you're doing and it results in something enjoyable or cool, it results in something enjoyable or cool, whether or not we call it out. Now, we want to, especially with our kids, we want to engage on those things, but treating it as an accomplishment, like, oh, good job, which is, we say stuff like this all the time. This is not like a thing you should avoid or that you're doing something bad or anything like that. But good job, if what you're looking to do is to try and like guide their attention to continuing these efforts and exploring these things, then we want to reinforce the process, not the result. So good job would be a less effective way to get somebody to continue to explore that stuff than to say, oh, that's really interesting. Tell me about this, or what's that, or what was that? And you can't fake it. You have to genuinely be curious, right? Like the other week, my oldest son and I walked around for like an hour, and I was literally just asking him questions about his favorite interest at the moment, which is Five Nights at Freddy's, the like Five Nights at Freddy's game franchise. I genuinely am curious because he's so interested and fascinated by it. I want to learn about it. So I'm asking him questions that are actual, they're not performative. I'm hearing and I'm coming up with questions based on what I'm trying to understand and so on and so forth. Right. Interest. Yeah, just engage with them rather than evaluating them. And this is advice for you, for yourself. The more that you evaluate your own self as doing a good job or doing a bad job, even when you're saying, oh, I'm doing a good job, including, and it's something I struggle with, but a lot of us struggle with evaluating our own feelings of like, if I'm feeling rested, good. If I'm feeling tired, bad. If I'm feeling healthy, good. If I'm feeling happy, good. If I'm feeling sad, bad. Those things are inherently enjoyable or unenjoyable, but to then put this element on them of like, and therefore, if we're experiencing the unenjoyable thing, it means we're doing a bad job, or experiencing the enjoyable thing, it means we're doing a good job, changes the way that we relate to those things. So again, these are not bad things to do, but remind me in a future one to talk about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, because that's a lot of where this goes. But I am going to wrap up, and I want to go out there and see thank you for being here. I would love to talk more. I'll be back next week, same time. If you're here next week, great. If not, I'll be here every Monday, same time, more or less. Thank you, and goodbye.